And as typical with when one head coach leaves, another hires most of their assistants when they come into these new roles. One is for the offensive coordinator position that came in. Coach Mason hires Bodie Reeder, who is most recently the Northern Iowa offensive coordinator, not too far from where I live, but he's going to be running that Blue Raiders offense. What can you describe this new look Blue Raider offense for the listeners?
The best way to look at it, if anyone's watched MTSU football, you know that it's been the air raid offense. Tony Franklin was a longtime offensive coordinator. He's been removed since 2020, but the air raid offense was kind of here to stay for a while after his tenure. You see a lot of spread, 4 outs. You're going to have one quarterback, one running back. Very seldomly use a tight end in any sort of situation. So to put it in technical terms, you're going to see a lot of 11 and 12 personnel. But gosh, the one thing that I love to see is a quarterback under center. I love the pistol and I love the shotgun, but something that we saw at the spring game was so we actually had a quarterback go under center, and just kind of the ironic reaction of the press box that afternoon was that there was a quarterback going under center. We haven't seen that in 10 years, so that was kind of a cool thing to see. But one thing that I think is interesting about Bodie Reeder's offense is his utilization of the tight ends. And I know we'll talk more about personnel coming up, but he with those 11 and 12 personnels, he's going to shift a lot of those tight ends into the slot. He uses them on a lot of level concepts. He spreads the field out vertically, whereas with the air raid offense and us being undersized, we've utilized a lot of the horizontal passing game, which has stunted our ability to run the football. So he's spreading the field out more vertically than we've ever seen, despite moving away from the air raid offense and the spread. And again, as we'll touch on here in a little bit, I'm sure is the running game. The running game is just we're hoping to finally get out of the bottom dwelling of Conference USA and finally see the run game take off.
All right, let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that is the quarterback. They return a pretty good quarterback. Last year's starter, Nicholas Fatiato. How did he look in the spring, and was he comfortable in the new offense?
Absolutely. And I think going into it, a lot of us, we had our suspicions that there might be a quarterback battle between Vadiato and the Gold Coast Community College transfer Luther Richardson, who's from Nashville. But given what we saw at the spring game, there's no doubt that Vadiato is going to be the number one this year. He looked extremely comfortable, to answer your question there, Justice. He was 15 to 16 passing, over 228 yards. He had a touchdown pass in that game. So I'm extremely impressed with Vadiato. He doesn't seem to have missed a beat, seems to fit in perfectly well into Bodie Reeder's offense, and he seems to click pretty well with Derek Mason. And for the most part, a lot of his key weapons have returned. So I don't think that he's going to miss a beat this year. I do anticipate him being top of the conference again in passing, much like he has been in years past. So a lot to like about Vadiato and what he brings to the table.
So you mentioned Luther Richardson, who they bring in from Golden West Junior College, who also, I believe, before that was at Cincinnati for a short period. They returned Stone Frost, and they had a true freshman early enrollee, Roman Gagliano, as well. Kind of how did those guys look this spring, and kind of did anyone step up to kind of assume that backup role?
Is with Roman coming in as a freshman, he kind of already caught the eye of a lot of MTSU fans for other reasons off the football field. Just a fun story about Roman. The Lady Raiders, they had their Conference USA championship down in Huntsville, and Derek Mason shipped all the players down to Huntsville, a little hour-and-a-half drive to watch the ladies play in the championship game. And as a part of the halftime show, Gagliano hit a half-court shot to win a 3 nights vacation in like a Florida resort or something like that. So a lot of us got introduced to Gagliano before we ever saw him put pads on. But really, what surprised a lot of us at the spring game was that Roman actually took the first snaps for his team ahead of Richardson. Gagliano, he's still an incoming freshman. He has all the tools that you would think a quarterback would need. He just still has kind of those freshman legs about him, if you will. He's got a great arm. He's able to spread the field vertically, as I've already spoken on, much like Vadiato. Still a little hesitant with the ball. I think that's more of a comfort thing, more so than anything else. I mean, he is a true freshman, and he's going to be sitting behind Richardson, who has a year of college level experience, than Vadiato, who's been playing there what feels like 10 years, but he's got 3 years of experience himself. So I expect Roman to kind of take the reins in a couple years. To go back on Richardson, the guy has all the tools. He has the size. He's got a better arm, objectively, than Vadiato. That doesn't always necessarily equate to being a better quarterback, but he definitely has that vertical threat that you're looking for that can really spread teams out. But Richardson would be a great backup. And in years past, we've seen MTSU go down in regards to the quarterback position. We tend to run in the past with the air raid offense, and having such a small offensive line, it's forced quarterbacks to move and use their feet. And we know Vadiato is very comfortable with that. And that's why that dual threat aspect that he has makes him so tough to defenses. Richardson's not quite as mobile. That's something that we'd have to keep an eye on in regards to where his development comes when Vadiato finally graduates. But I do think Richardson would be the next to the throne after Vadiato, and I was impressed again with what his arm talent is. But there's still a lot of question marks in regards to his playmaking ability, because in the spring game it's the most comfortable I've ever seen him, which is always good. You'd rather see your best ball when the lights come on. His reps in practice aren't necessarily those that'll make you stand out, which is why I think Gagliano might have earned that start in the spring game. But when the lights came on, Richardson looked very, very comfortable. And to be quite honest with everybody and those that may be scouting Richardson out, he could very easily be a starter for one of the 136 teams this next year. So I hate to say it, and I hate that that's the landscape of football, but he's a guy that could certainly get nabbed up given the kind of tape that we were able to see on him in the spring game.
Gagliano, how would you describe his style of play? Is it more like Vadiato? Does he have some mobility, or is he more a pocket passer like Richardson?
It's tough to kind of, I would say, I would, if I had to lean one way more than the other, it's more of a Richardson type. He's definitely more of a pocket passer. Now, in high school, he has the legs, he can move. I would say he's just as fast as Vadiato is. So I'm sure he has that elusiveness. The only problem with my evaluation is I've only seen him in pads and touch practice. Sure. So he's never had to make that run, if you know what I mean, where gotcha. Again, like in the spring game, it's a touch tackle. So it's hard to say what he's capable of. Because there are times where it seems like in the spring game, he kind of forced the issue with some of his passes. But I think that's more of a virtue of they're trying to get him to stay in the pocket and make a little bit more of a mature decision with the ball. So, but sure. I think there's a lot of promise with him and seeing where his development goes.
All right, moving on to the running game, which you kind of mentioned had its struggles there in 2023. They do return just about everyone, including Jaden Cradle, Frank Peasant, Terry Wilkins, and Jaquil Middlebrook, and then they bring in Brian Bruton from Connecticut. Was Coach Reeder able to install his desire for that physical run game this spring, and how did that group look in the spring?
Yeah, it's the group collectively looked good. We didn't see very many reps from Frank Peasant and Jaden Credle. Mostly, I think that's a volume thing. That's going to be a running back by committee, as it always has been. But you mentioned about how bad, or you put it eloquently, but I'll say the run game has been bad, and it has been bad for some time. I think we've been under 125 yards a game since 2019. Bottom of the conference every single year in that span. So it's not a surprise. I think a lot of that has to do with the personnel on the offensive line. We've always been, for the most part, undersized, but it also is a part of the scheme when it comes to offense. But with the run game now, I saw a lot of promise with Jace Gardner and Raymond Banner. Those are guys that Raymond Banner is actually a local talent from Laverne High School, a kid that's very physical. Jace Gardner is a transfer in from California, another kid that is very, very physical running the football. There's a lot of promise about guys like that. Something about Frank Peasant and Flip Credle that makes them such desirable in regards to the run game in the past is their ability to just put their head down and run over people. We don't really have shifty running backs, if you will. We have guys that are more of your hard nose, or as Coach Mason would call them, blue collar type athletes, where these guys are willing to, dig their toes in and go head to head in an old style Oklahoma type drill kind of thing. So the run game is definitely physical. I think that now that we're venturing out of the air raid, that we'll actually see a resurgence, if you will, from the run game, and it could be from any of those guys. One thing that I would say with being a running back by committee, it could be any guy on any given night, and surely 3 or 4 guys are going to touch the ball, a handful of times every night.
So how do you think that split works out? Like 50-50 with 2 guys, 3 or 4 guys work in there, and it's like what do you think that percentage is?
I'm not too well versed on Bodie Reeder and his style, but I can tell you from years past, given just last year for that matter, Frank Peasant and Flip Credle. Flip, it's always the hot hand, to kind of answer your question in short. Flip kind of got the hot hand there in the middle of the year. And from that point on, it kind of seemed to be his baby. And then we had a few carries with Peasant, and you'd roll in some of your depth pieces from there. if I had to put a number on it, I would say that Peasant and Kretl are probably going to get 70% of your carries. And then where I saw in the spring game, you could get Banner and Gardner thrown in there in kind of that 30% role. But it's still, I don't know how much tape of Bodie Reader he's been putting out. So that's why I say that. I saw a lot of 11 and 12 personnel. Again, we saw some snaps under center, so it could be anything. But I would say confidently 70% would go to Peasant and Kretl.
The passing game does lose some returning production at wide receiver. They lose Elijah Metcalf off to Marshall, Justin Olson to Charlotte, and DJ England Chisholm, Jake Dobson, and Jeremy Tate Jr. all graduated. But you bring in a lot of talent as well. You get the addition of Amari Kelly coming over from Auburn, Jamarian Carter from Vanderbilt, and then you also return Javonte Sherman, Kellen Stewart, and others from last year. How did that wide receiver room shape up this spring?
Right. The transfer portal taketh, right, and it giveth. And so for us, we lost a lot of guys in that transfer portal, but the biggest pickup for us is going to be Omari Kelly from Auburn. Going to be one of the more highest ranked prospects MTSU has ever brought in regards to high school. Didn't get a lot of reps at Auburn, but man, the guy just has the it factor. MTSU, for the most part, we have some good history in regards to wide receivers. The most recent would be Richie James, who just won a Super Bowl. So he kind of has that talent ability where he can make a catch in traffic. He's got a way with his body to have great sideline awareness. He's a guy that I would pinpoint as being a huge X factor for this team in regards to how far they can really go. There's a few pieces in there that could definitely change how far this passing game can really go. But if you're looking at a scouting report on MTSU, it's got to be Omari Kelly. He's got to be your number one priority. He's more than likely going to draw a lot of help on the top side from safeties. He's definitely a vertical threat, one of the faster, if not the fastest we've got on roster right now. Gamarian Carter's another guy that we haven't quite seen him make that leap just yet, but he's got all the physical attributes that you're looking for in a wide receiver. He's got the speed, he's got the vertical. It's just the playmaking ability. We haven't quite seen that opportunity yet, and then maybe that's just what it is. The reps aren't quite there yet, but yeah, if you're looking for a receiver in particular, it's Omari Kelly, and if he's not first team Conference USA, I would be stunned.
Yeah, he's certainly got a lot of buzz this spring, a lot of good press. Certainly looks like the wide receiver one in that Bodie Reader offense. Who else would you maybe think that would join him in that starting wide receiver roles?
Really, I would say as far as the wide receivers, it's tough to say. Like I said, Gamarian Carter is kind of a guy that you would think would hop in that spot given his talent abilities. I mean, he's an SEC talent. Guys don't end up on SEC rosters by accident. So he's a guy that you'd like to see kind of step up in that role. I think with what we saw from the spring game is, as I touched on earlier, was the utilization of tight ends. Holden Willis, who was our leading receiver last year, is now stepped into the tight end role. And so with him, we saw him split out into slot stuff. We saw him split out wide to the numbers. We saw him, again, he had his finger in the dirt. He could be a guy that could play anywhere in regards to the receiving side of the offense. And he's our leading production along with Javonte Sherman. So those two guys, it depends on how you want to look at our offense and where they actually fit. But I would see Holden Willis as being a continued threat, someone that can take off some of that pressure that Kelly's going to feel. Javonte Sherman's another guy that has sure hands, has a lot of experience playing at MTSU that could kind of be helpful for getting that pressure off Kelly.
Yeah, happy to hear that about Sherman. He was someone I kind of had high hopes for last year. It didn't really seem to pan out, but I thought he had a good spring last year. So glad to hear he might be making an impact this year.
So, in talking about Holden Willis, and talking about the shift and kind of how the offense is going to be, he was kind of a hybrid tight end wide receiver last year, and now he's making that move. I guess you would say to tight end, but is anything really changing from his? I guess I don't want to say maybe production standpoint.
Yeah, you'd have to think he's going to be sharing a lot more of those receptions now that you're going to put him down on the line, make him a six-man, a chip blocker, if you will, because that's kind of his style. He's a wide receiver out of high school. He's always been a wide receiver. The thing that puts him in the category of a hybrid, as you put it, is just his size. He's not necessarily going to be that wide receiver skinny type, if you will. He's kind of a girthy, big guy. So he has those broad shoulders that's going to put him in that category of being utilized multiple ways. Production, I do fully anticipate it to drop, but he will get a lot more receptions than the average tight end in the Division I. If that does kind of answer that question for you, I do expect him, if things don't work there, that they roll him out to the X or the Y. That's just kind of something that I think they're willing to play with because we don't have that true backup to Omari Kelly, maybe outside of Javonte Sherman. So his role is, I think when you describe it as hybrid, that's what it's going to be. He's a guy that he's not comfortable blocking, so he's not really great at masking what you're doing on the offensive side. You know that if he's there, he's probably more than likely just going to be a chip blocker. Or you're not going to run to his side and the risk of getting him hurt. That's a very amateur way to look at it, but that's kind of my synopsis on it. He's a pass catcher first and a blocker second. We've got guys like TK Sudurith, who actually caught a touchdown at the spring game, very physical back. He's a guy that I kind of like a lot that could mask that a lot better, if you will. I'm a Titans fan, so I like more of a Delaney Walker type of guy who can do both sides of the tight end position, and he fits the bill there. Holden is just kind of more of your, I keep going back to him, but he's kind of a hybrid type.
Did he play any in line in the spring, or was he kind of always kind of like out wide in the slot?
No, he did play in line a little bit. Like I said, when they ran a 12 personnel, he was actually the H, so he had some opportunities to see him everywhere. And I don't know, again, if that's their they want to just test him out and see where he's comfortable and see what kind of sets there, or see what kind of patterns they can get out of him running with his finger in the dirt. But it's still tough to say what Bodie Reeder wants to do. And I don't know if that's him testing himself or he's just trying to keep the film limited. I'm not entirely sure, but I think Holden will still be a big contributor to the offense just because he has sure hands and he's got a big frame.
The talking about lost production, the offensive line took a hit this offseason as well, losing 4 of 5 starters as well as a top backup. What did they kind of do this offseason to shore that lineup, and how did they look this spring?
They did they hit the transfer portal very hard, and it did a great job. Mason did a great job in regards to bolstering up that line. As I've already talked about how little the line has been in years past. And I'll go through some of these names. We got transfers like Ellis Adams from Tennessee Tech, 6'4", 376. That's not a typo. He's 376 pounds. You got Shamar Crawford, 6'5", 296. Ethan Ellis, 6'6", 316. Jamela Knox, 6'7", 311. And then we just got the news of 6'4", 295, Marcus Miller from UNLV, who just committed from the transfer portal. So that's 5 guys. Now, unfortunately, most of those guys are going to be the tackle position. Marcus Miller from UNLV actually is an interior lineman, which is good news for us because that's kind of the area that we still have question marks as far as depth pieces go. But when you go through those guys, you're looking at 6'5" plus. Everyone's over 280 pounds. So that's something that we're just not used to seeing. And you got some guys that are over 350 pounds. It's incredible. So we've lost a lot of pieces, yes. And sometimes that can definitely hurt an offense. But sometimes when you bring in an entirely new squad, it could also be good news for you.
Sure.
They're all learning the same system at the same pace. No one has more experience than the other in the MTSU offense. So there's a lot of battles as far as who's going to get the starting position on the outside tackles. You also have Mateo Guevara, who is a returning sophomore, who was on the All-Conference USA All-Conference freshman team last year, who's going to get his time as well. So there's a battle at the tackle position, but one thing that is just refreshing is the size. And I think when we go into our non-conference games against Duke and Ole Miss, we're not going to be overshadowed by those guys. We actually have the frames to kind of match the SEC lines.
So if you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout season in 2024, who would that be?
I think the obvious answer is Omari Kelly. I think he's going to be your breakout player just because his production at Auburn wasn't there. One guy I purposefully left off when we were talking about wide receivers is Cameron Lacey. He's a redshirt freshman from Toccoa Falls, Georgia. One guy that is on no one's radar, and that's why I think he is a guy that if he gets the development that we're looking for over the summer, he's a guy that you could really see pop up on G5 radars. Very slippery type. That's kind of the best way I can describe him. And we saw a lot of that in the spring game. He has 3 catches for 50 yards. He actually, he slipped for a post route there in the spring game, and it would have been a 50-yard touchdown. But Roman was kind of seeking some pressure, wasn't able to get off his back foot and throw a 50-yard missile. Who can blame him? But he's a guy that is very slippery. He's a guy that can get loose and just get lost. He's a very small frame. I think he's listed at 5'8", 170 pounds. So he reminds me a lot of Richie James when he came through MTSU. But he's a guy that, like I said, he would play the slot partnered with someone like Omari Kelly that could be dangerous, and he could potentially rack up a lot of catches just by virtue of being the underneath to Omari Kelly. So I like him a lot. I think that if we see the development there, you've got a really good 1-2 spearheaded dragon there in regards to the passing game.